我看那个死神也是阴敌哦。
没有，那个死神，看你想
一敌他一敌，你会输哦。
我跳到他脸上了。
哎呦，
不要！你刚刚我没有一贯补你就嗝屁了。
他们把它加那个哦。
波神不要先下。
On the S&P 500 Mini. Let's bring in Saeed Abaqus.
I'm holding the name of 6 stocks. These stocks can be bought and held forever. You never have to
and also a generator.
The wave roller has survived large waves at sea for over a year and delivered electricity via an underwater cable to the grid in Portugal. Meanwhile, the company has won a €2.5 million grant to work on an upgraded version of the wave roller, aiming to increase the electricity generation capacity to 1 megawatt. The upscaled device would have a bigger panel, 2 power takeoff units, and improved software to control the energy production.
We have taken into use a wave prediction algorithm that kind of tells us what kind of waves are coming in to our device. That gives us few seconds to prepare for capturing more energy, and the difference in that is significant.
Our future plans are to deliver technology around the world. So I'm hoping we can be working on delivering technology to projects in Asia and also in the American continent as well.
Meanwhile, Israeli company Eco Wave Power is taking a different approach to capturing the power of the ocean. For the company's founder, Inna Braverman, developing new sources of renewable energy is a personal mission.
I was born in Ukraine in 1986, and 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, causing the largest in history nuclear disaster. I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of such explosion. I had a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. Luckily, my mother, a nurse, approached my crib on time and gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, which saved my life. I got a second chance in life and decided to do something good with it.
Growing up, Inna wanted to be a politician to positively change the world. After working as a translator at a renewable energy company, she decided to change paths.
Solar and wind energy were fully commercialized. There were a lot of amazing technologies implemented everywhere. I saw that wave energy, although it's an immense source of electricity, the biggest companies in the world are trying to develop wave energy with no success. And there was kind of a race going on in the world of who is the company that is going to develop a viable wave energy solution first.
In 2011, the then 24-year-old Inna co-founded Eco Wave Power. Instead of installing devices offshore, the company's devices are attached to existing breakwaters, jetties and piers.
Our technology is very cost efficient, especially in comparison to the offshore technologies, because we don't need any ships, divers, underwater mooring or cables. We install on existing man-made structures, and all our expensive equipment, the generator, the hydraulic conversion unit, the automation, is located on land just like a regular power station. This is the EcoWave Power conversion unit that has been operating in Jaffa port since 2014 until 2020. Here you can see how the technology works. Basically, the floaters are going up and down and pushing the hydro cylinders, which transmit biodegradable fluid into land-located accumulators. A pressure is being built. The higher the waves, the higher the pressure, which is used to turn the hydro motor, which is turning the generators. The whole system is controlled by a smart automation system, which you can see right here. And in case of upcoming storms, the system automatically raises the floater above the water level and keeps them in the upward position until the storm passes.
The company has been operating a 100 kilowatt grid-connected device in Gibraltar since 2016, which is enough to power 100 households. Currently, Ina and her team are working on another 100 kilowatt project at the port of Jaffa in Tel Aviv.
The project will be also the first time in the history of Israel that wave energy will officially connect to the electrical grid. And our goal going forward is to expand it to all suitable breakwaters in the city of Tel Aviv and to supply a significant part of the city's electricity needs.
Today, engineers and entrepreneurs are still trying to crack wave energy. Globally, only a few hundred kilowatts of wave energy are deployed, compared with gigawatts of offshore wind. But the field has come a long way in recent years, and with the right engineering solutions, this new power source could eventually become competitive with more mature renewables like solar and wind.
I would have a lot more confidence in the successful wave energy companies today as opposed to like 20 years ago. But in the next few years, or maybe the next couple of decades, it will be more likely to be used in remote locations like islands that are otherwise dependent on expensive diesel power, or out at sea on gas decommissioning rigs, or for powering underwater autonomous vehicles.
So definitely, wave energy can compete with other renewable energy sources, but I personally believe that this is not a competition. In order to have a 100% renewable energy friendly world, we need all renewable energy sources to work together.
关键时刻，握着阿嬷帮我准备的球拍，让我更有把握赢球。阿嬷，好。
To go the floating rate route, they had a cheaper cost than 5% initially, but if they priced it, let's say LIBOR plus 300, now their costs are above 6%, probably going above 7%, depending what the Fed does, maybe even to 8%. So covering that interest is going to be a bigger issue for those companies that have chosen to finance themselves with floating rate debt, be it in the public markets or the private markets.
Bob, well, you get the final word here, buddy, so let's finish here. The difference between the two of you right now, I think, is clear for all to see. But Bob, you seem to be asking a question, and I think it reads as follows. What if this is just the calm before the storm? Is that how you're thinking about things, Bob?
Yeah, I think the markets are priced for a soft landing. They're not priced for a recession. We'll know when they're priced for a recession when credit spreads start blowing out and there's no counterparty bid on the other side. And by the way, when there's a flight to quality bid, so government bond yields start falling. The only thing indicating that there is the prospect of a recession is the inversion of the yield curve. Credit spreads and flight to quality to treasuries are not indicating it. The market's priced for soft landing. And by the way, the last soft landing we had was in 94 going into 95. And high yield credit spreads were at these levels. They held these kinds of levels. So again, we're priced for a soft landing.
I think there's a correlation between... Sure, Gershon, you can jump in by all means, Gershon. I've got 10 seconds for you. Have 15.
Say spreads, dollar prices matter. Coupons are very, very low, and they've had to adjust, so you get closer to recovery levels. So again, 475 over at a dollar price of 85 is very different than the last times we've seen spreads around there, which is wider than median, where dollar prices were closer to par.
You were never going to let Bob have the final word, were you? Gershon Distenfeld there. Bob Michael, I get the feeling that when Liverpool have a bad season, you just become super bearish. Is there any correlation there, Bob?
Hey, don't I get to ask a question for Mike McKee? Is that it?
If you want to squeeze one in, Mike McKee's ran off, but you can squeeze one in if you want to. I can keep blowing breaks. We can do this all day. Go on, Bob.
Okay, no. I think what we're all looking at is the shape of the yield curve, and the Fed's preferred measure is the near-term forward spread. So the difference between 3-month bills and 3-month bills 18 months out. And according to Powell in March, that's 100% explanatory of the Treasury curve. I think by the time Mike asks his question, that will have inverted. So he should ask, what is the Fed's preferred measure of the yield curve now telling them about recession?
I'm sure Mike McKee's listening. We're going to turn this into a Christmas special, an extended version. Gershon Distenfeld, Bob Michael, to the two of you, thank you. What a debate right now. In credit. In the equity market, at least, we're down by 0.4% on the S&P. On the Nasdaq, we're down 0.4% also. Coming up on this programme, President Biden slamming big oil as the midterm race enters the final stretch.
The oil industry is not doing the right thing. They haven't met their commitment to invest in America and support the American people. One by one, major oil companies have reported their profits for the last 2 quarters. I mean, profits so high, it's hard to believe.
The White House slamming big oil and Democrats slamming the Fed. That conversation still ahead.
Policy, politics. From the White House to the Hill, Bloomberg covers the leaders in legislation.
That was really a tectonic shift for this White House.
The theory of this bill, as I understand it, is there'll be a multiplier effect.
How did Democrats mobilize specifically younger voters?
Bringing you the political news you need to know.
The president has made it very clear that this is a significant focus.
For the intersection of Wall Street and Washington, nobody covers politics like Bloomberg.
What do Formula One cars and your local supermarket have in common? Well, strange as it sounds, they might both be using the same technology. A lot of innovation has trickled down from the world of high-tech engines, and it hasn't just found a new life in road cars. F1 cars have long been thought of as the peak of cool, and technology in them is also helping to cool down our produce aisles. Engineers from Williams are using their knowledge from 9 Constructors' Championships and working with company Aerofoil to help reduce the energy consumption of supermarkets. The device they're building is based on the design of an F1 car's rear wing. It attaches to fridges to keep more cool air in the unit. They estimate it can reduce supermarket energy consumption by 25%. One innovation from F1 is also helping hybrids reduce their carbon footprint. That's KERS, or the Kinetic Energy Recovery System. In common parlance, it's known as regenerative braking and works by storing energy of the car decelerating in a battery for later use. If that's not enough, F1 is now looking at TERS, or a thermal energy recovery system, looking to harness the heat produced from braking and the engine exhaust. That could allow cars to generate the same power using 30% less fuel. So while F1 may have a reputation as a gas guzzler, some of its innovations in the name of speed are helping in the everyday fight against climate change.
November 8th, as Americans decide the future of Congress and state legislatures, Bloomberg will be live in Washington, D.C. to cover the results as they break and provide insight about what it means for the country.
We're in a divided country, and these are really close elections.
We take a look at what the races could mean for Wall Street.
Special election night coverage starts at 8 p.m. on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And tune in to Surveillance live from D.C. at 6 a.m.
3 letters were found at the site of the bombing that took credit for the attack on behalf of Islamic State. There were, however, reasons to doubt this particular narrative.
Would actually be a surprise if ISIS were actually part of this attack. Possibly could be employed by other groups like the far right wing to try and shift the blame.
The letters had some strange qualities. They were written in a strange German that used big, sophisticated words, but had basic grammar mistakes, as if someone was native German speaker but pretending to be a foreign person.
Federal investigators have detained one man suspected of links to Islamist terrorism, one of 2 suspects whose apartments were raided this morning.
Shortly after the bombing, a man in Austria named Rudolf, who was a big BVB fan, he noticed that something strange was going on the stock market related to the team's shares. He emailed the lawyers of BVB, who then forwarded that email on to investigators. The email stated that someone had bought 60,000 BVB put options, a wager that the value of the shares of the team would fall below a certain amount at a certain date.
Why would someone buy that ahead of a match and then 3 bombs go off? Something isn't right here.
For the person to make money off of that, it required the stock to go down quite a bit in a fairly short period of time. And it wouldn't just be the team losing a match, it would require something much bigger than that. There was another big red flag about this purchase, which is the fact that it had actually been made, number one, on the day of the bombing, but also from an IP address that had been traced to the actual hotel where the bombing had taken place.
When 3 explosions targeted the bus carrying the Borussia Dortmund footballers on April the 11th, written notes left at the scene claimed the attack was the work of ISIL. The truth, as is now alleged, is remarkable.
On April 21st, the police arrested a man in a southern German city called Tübingen. He was on his way to work, and his name was Sergei Venagold. He seemed like an unlikely suspect because he had no known connections to the Islamic terror world. He didn't seem like a far-right extremist. He didn't seem like a left-wing extremist either. He seemed to be a completely unremarkable young man.
A 28-year-old German-Russian man named only as Sergei W. stayed in the same hotel as the players on the night before the bombing. He specifically requested an upper room overlooking the bushes where the explosive devices were hidden.
The media dissected why he would do that, what was his past.
He had been inspired by the 2015 terror attack in Paris. And he noticed that in the aftermath of the attack, the stocks of French companies went down. And he believed that if an attack took place that was directed at a specific company, that the decrease in stock price for that company would be even more dramatic.
It never occurred to anyone that someone would do that out of greed.
We now know that the suspect bought 3 different derivatives on the Borussia Dortmund shares. With all these derivatives, he bet on falling shares. The suspect bought the majority of these financial products on the 11th of April, the day of the attack.
If the plot had been completely successful and the stock had reached a value of 0, Venagold would have made up to 570,000 euros, or the equivalent of about $608,000. Ultimately, the plan completely backfired.
The attacker, Sergei Venagold, didn't make any money. In fact, he lost money.
In court, he would be extremely quiet. He usually kept his hands clasped together. One of the lawyers actually commented that he had never seen a defendant act so calmly. Venagold had served some time in the German military. From that information and from online research, he was able to figure out how to assemble remote detonated bombs that would do what he hoped to do. There were a few days of extremely emotional testimony, including the soccer players who described doubting whether or not they could ever play another game again.
It brought everything back up, and it didn't quite help them to kind of process what was going on.
Throughout it all, he sat there completely silent. The big mystery that was swirling around the trial was the question of why he may have simply done it because he wanted to impress a woman. Rebecca is a young woman who has a very troubled home life. She ultimately sees her relationship with Weinergold as an opportunity to leave that troubled home. Weinergold is a Russian immigrant to Germany. He speaks with an accent. He has anxiety in large groups of Germans. She begins to resent the fact that he has these fears and feels a little bit trapped. Rebecca attempts to dump him on multiple occasions, and he threatens to commit suicide if she leaves him. Weinergold apparently told Rebecca that she would soon be seeing a surprise. After being dumped via text message, he apparently began planning for this attack in earnest. Weinergold was charged with 28 counts of attempted murder, which carried a maximum sentence in Germany of life in prison. He claimed that he had nothing to do with the attack, but as time went on, he admitted that he had actually been the person who had built the explosives and had set them off. But he claimed that he didn't want to actually kill anybody. Ultimately, Weinergold didn't receive the harshest possible sentence. He was given 14 years in prison, but it's still a considerable amount in jail in Germany.
We had mounted our own campaign, even in the U.S.
He flew to America and he hired two consumer lawyers here in America to take on Pepsi. He had a meeting at Pepsi's headquarters to try and resolve the problem, but he said he wanted to take it all the way to the highest courts in America. When those cases were heard in America, those courts decided that this was a problem that should be heard in the Philippines, not in America. Back in the Philippines, Del Fierro continued his case in the Filipino courts. At one stage, there were arrest warrants handed out for 9 Pepsi Cola executives, which he saw as a big victory. We don't know if those arrest warrants were ever upheld, but it made newspaper headlines across the country. Pepsi did not take kindly to Del Fierro's campaign. They tried everything to shut him down. They sued him for libel.
My father had to attend 3 times a month for a branch 145 and another hearing for the branch 113 also 3 times a month. Also, there was a time my father was hospital due to heart failure. Still, he had to attend the 2 branch hearing. Otherwise, for not attending, the judge will issue a warrant of arrest to my father. My father passed away January 13, 2010. After staying for almost 1 year in the hospital, he died of complication due to heart failure. After the death of my father, I was inspired to do the website. PepsiCo will be remembered for what they did to the consumer in the Philippines and to my father.
When I reached out to Pepsi for comment for this story, they claimed that they didn't have access to anyone who was working at Pepsi that was around in those days. They also said that during COVID-19 they didn't have access to their documents about this, but you know, they were very careful to say that they were sorry for everything that happened, and we do know that Pepsi did try everything to try and make this right. The Pepsi number fever disaster cost the company millions. We know that they paid up to $10 million in those goodwill payments, but the financial effect could be much greater. After the disaster, we know that Pepsi sales dipped. They were overtaken by Coca-Cola again. Pepsi's number fever disaster changed the legacy of that soft drink in the Philippines forever. Some people of a certain age won't touch it. For many people, Pepsi is a taboo word. A lot of the people that I spoke to were still quite traumatized by their experience, by that experience of winning $1 million pesos, losing it, and then returning to their normal life in poverty in Manila. Experience of changed the legacy of that soft drink in the Philippines forever. Some people of a certain age won't touch it. For many people, Pepsi is a taboo word. A lot of the people that I spoke to were still quite traumatized by their experience, by that experience of winning $1 million pesos, losing it, and then returning to their normal life in poverty in Manila.
When the news of the bombing came out, it was a massive story in Germany.
We are following some breaking news coming to us out of Dortmund in Germany.
It was covered by all the media outlets.
3 roadside explosions triggered at the same time last night as a coach left its hotel in the south of Dortmund.
Public figures commented on it.
We should not let them affect our life, whoever it was.
The media echo went far beyond Dortmund.
I think it was front page news in every single big paper around Europe. Everyone thought of like a terrorist attack, and people were scared that throughout the city in Dortmund there was more attacks to be happening.
Unbeknownst to investigators, just after the bomb went off and the players of the team were shell-shocked, the person who had masterminded the attack was actually sitting in the hotel eating steak and sweet potatoes. My name is Thomas Rogers. I'm the journalist who wrote the article, The Get-Rich-Quick Scheme That Nearly Killed a German Soccer Team. Dortmund is a mid-sized city in the western part of Germany in a state called North Rhine-Westphalia. And it's a former industrial city that's kind of fallen on hard times in the last few decades. It was severely bombed in the war, so the center of the city is quite stark. Some of the few high points include its soccer team.
My name is Ike Henning. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News, and I'm a great fan of Borussia Dortmund. Dortmund fans are super loyal. On all match days, the entire city is in black and yellow. It's like a religion.
I think more than most German cities, soccer does play a very large role in the identity of Dortmund. In October of 2000, the BVB became the first team in the Bundesliga to actually go public. Salaries for soccer players in the Bundesliga have gone up very dramatically. With such high prices, they thought that by going public, they would be able to compete better with big teams like Bayern Munich.
Unfortunately, that didn't go too well. Dortmund bought too many expensive players, high wages, and the club almost went bust in 2005.
The price of their shares, it has sometimes gone up, but mostly gone down since they made that decision. So on April 11th, 2017, the team was staying in a hotel on the outskirts of Dortmund.
Match days are always special in Dortmund. Everyone is looking forward to it. The team always meets in the same hotel ahead of matches.
They stayed in this hotel in order to have a kind of neutral space before games so that they could concentrate, be sort of isolated from distractions, things like that.
Everyone was pretty optimistic. They had a chance to go really far, maybe into the finals. I was in the office and getting ready for match day. I was going to meet with a friend, a fellow Dortmund supporter, in a pub. As always, the fans are very excited about matches.
On that day, they were heading to play in the quarterfinal against AS Monaco at Signal Iduna Stadium, which is in the center of Dortmund. Shortly before 7 p.m., the players of the team boarded their official team bus.
When the bus took off the parking lot of the hotel and turned on the street, there were three detonations, 3 bombs that exploded and hit the bus of Dortmund.
3 explosions occurred close to the Borussia Dortmund team bus. The B team bus had just left the hotel. The explosions destroyed 2 windows in the rear part of the bus.
People screamed, people jumped to the ground.
The fellow Dortmund fan I was supposed to watch the match with, he called me and said, turn on the TV, there was an attack on the Dortmund bus, and I thought he was like, that was impossible.
Some of the players screamed at the driver to keep driving as fast as possible because they were worried that people might storm the bus.
German investigators say the explosive devices used in the attack on the Borussia Dortmund bus contained metal pins and that one had pierced a seat headrest.
Unbeknownst to the team members, the actual mastermind behind the attack was, as they were disembarking, the bus was actually eating steak and sweet potatoes at the hotel they had just left.
Authorities are attempting to verify a letter left at the scene claiming jihadists were behind the attack.
Because there had been a series of attacks by Islamic terrorists in Germany and Europe, there was widespread suspicion in the media that this was another Islamic terror attack. 3 letters were found at the site of the bombing that took credit for the attack on behalf of Islamic State. There were, however, reasons to doubt this particular narrative.
Would actually be a surprise if ISIS were actually part of this attack. Possibly could be a ploy by other groups like the far right wing to try and shift the blame.
The letters had some strange qualities. They were written in a strange German that used big, sophisticated words, but had basic grammar mistakes, as if someone was native German speaker but pretending to be a foreign person.
Federal investigators have detained 1 man suspected of links to Islamist terrorism, one of 2 suspects whose apartments were raided this morning.
Shortly after the bombing, a man in Austria named Rudolf, who was a big BVB fan, he noticed that something strange was going on the stock market related to the team's shares. He emailed the lawyers of BVB, who then forwarded that email on to investigators. The email stated that someone had bought 60,000 BVB put options, a wager that the value of the shares of the team would fall below a certain amount at a certain date.
Why would someone buy that ahead of a match and then 3 bombs go off? Something isn't right here.
For the person to make money off of that, it required the stock to go down quite a bit in a fairly short period of time. And it wouldn't just be the team losing a match, it would require something much bigger than that. There was another big red flag about this purchase, which is the fact that it had actually been made, number one, on the day of the bombing, but also from an IP address that had been traced to the actual hotel where the bombing had taken place.
When 3 explosions targeted the bus carrying the Borussia Dortmund footballers on April the 11th, written notes left at the scene claimed the attack was the work of ISIL. The truth, as is now alleged, is remarkable.
On April 21st, the police arrested a man in a southern German city called Tübingen. He was on his way to work, and his name was Sergei Venagold. He seemed like an unlikely suspect because he had no known connections to the Islamic terror world. He didn't seem like a far-right extremist. He didn't seem like a left-wing extremist either. He seemed to be a completely unremarkable young man.
A 28-year-old German-Russian man, named only as Sergei W., stayed in the same hotel as the players on the night before the bombing. He specifically requested an upper room overlooking the bushes where the explosive devices were hidden.
The media dissected why he would do that, what was his past.
He had been inspired by the 2015 terror attack in Paris. And he noticed that in the aftermath of the attack, the stocks of French companies went down. And he believed that if an attack took place that was directed at a specific company, that the decrease in stock price for that company would be even more dramatic.
It never occurred to anyone that someone would do that out of greed.
We now know that the suspect bought 3 different derivatives on the Borussia Dortmund shares. With all these derivatives, he bet on falling shares. The suspect bought the majority of these financial products on the 11th of April, the day of the attack.
If the plot had been completely successful, and the stock had reached a value of 0, Wienergold would have made up to 570,000 euros, or the equivalent of about $608,000. Ultimately, the plan completely backfired.
The attacker, Sergei Wienergold, didn't make any money. In fact, he lost money.
In court, he would be extremely quiet. He usually kept his hands clasped together. One of the lawyers actually commented that he had never seen a defendant act so calmly. Wienergold had served some time in the German military. From that information and from online research, he was able to figure out how to assemble remote detonated bombs that would do what he hoped to do. There were a few days of extremely emotional testimony, including the soccer players who described doubting whether or not they could ever play another game again.
It brought everything back up, and it didn't quite help them to kind of process what was going on.
Throughout it all, he sat there completely silent. The big mystery that was swirling around the trial was the question of why. He may have simply done it because he wanted to impress a woman. Rebecca is a young woman who has a very troubled home life. She ultimately sees her relationship with Wienergold as an opportunity to leave that troubled home. Wienergold is a Russian immigrant to Germany. He speaks with an accent. He has anxiety in large groups of Germans. She begins to resent the fact that he has these fears and feels a little bit trapped. Rebecca attempts to dump him on multiple occasions, and he threatens to commit suicide if she leaves him. Wienergold apparently told Rebecca that she would soon be seeing a surprise. After being dumped via text message, he apparently began planning for this attack in earnest. Wienergold was charged with 28 counts of attempted murder, which carried a maximum sentence in Germany of life in prison. He claimed that he had nothing to do with the attack, but as time went on, he admitted that he had actually been the person who had built the explosives and had set them off. But he claimed that he didn't want to actually kill anybody. Ultimately, Wienergold didn't receive the harshest possible sentence. He was given 14 years in prison, but it's still a considerable amount in jail in Germany.
The threat of an asteroid hitting Earth is very real. If it's big enough, it's also very final.
These are very, very infrequent events. The probability is not 0, though.
A blinding flash of light streaking across the sky.
About 100 tons of space rock falls on Earth every day. Most of it is so small it burns up in our atmosphere or lands unnoticed away from major populations. No human in the past 1,000 years is known to have been killed by a meteorite, and according to NASA, no large object is likely to strike the Earth any time in the next several hundred years. However, one thing is certain: we haven't found them all.
There are thousands out there, and we don't know where they are.
There are a lot of asteroids in our solar system. They number in the billions.
Scientists all over the world are working toward detecting and deflecting the most catastrophic of natural disasters.
The race is on to find as many of these objects as we can.
We have a way of calculating whether or not an asteroid is potentially dangerous or not.
I mean, I think it's something worth investing in. It's our existence at stake, right?
Amy, let's get this one out of the way. It's probably the question you get asked the most, but how scared should we be?
Asteroids and comets are a natural hazard that's out there like a lot of other natural hazards. These are very, very infrequent events, these collision events, where an object actually impacts the Earth. The most important thing that we need to know about asteroids is when the next impact is going to happen and how bad it will be. What we know is that an object that's about, say, 1 kilometer across is capable of causing very, very wide devastation across the planet, really, truly global devastation. The object that wiped out the dinosaurs was somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 kilometers across, so even bigger than that. At 1 kilometer, it's still going to be very bad and will have global effects. For objects that are capable of causing what I would call sort of regional damage, kind of a large major metropolitan area, a city and its surrounding environment, sort of around 100-ish meters. It depends on the details of the composition and so forth.
By the 1980s, NASA was cataloguing near-Earth objects. In 1994, stargazers watched as comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 hit Jupiter. The resulting zone of chaos was estimated to be as large as the Earth, and the event became a turning point in the search for asteroids and comets in our solar system. In 1998, Congress tasked NASA with finding 90% of asteroids and comets 1 kilometer wide or larger. Soon after, Hollywood blockbusters Armageddon and Deep Impact brought attention and fear to the masses.
The great news is that the vast majority, more than 90% of all the really large 1 kilometer near-Earth objects have been found. The challenge now is working down to these smaller sizes that are still quite capable of causing a lot of damage, but they're just harder to spot because they're fainter, they're smaller.
Can you give us a sense of how many are out there in our solar system?
We know that there are a lot of asteroids in our solar system. They number in the billions. Most of them, however, are between Mars and Jupiter in what we call the main asteroid belt. This is a region of space where most of the asteroids in the inner part of our solar system live, and they stay there for many billions of years. There is another population, though, that kind of leaks inward and gets into the region somewhat close to the Earth, and we call these near-Earth objects. We think that there are millions and millions of near-Earth objects that are out there in the total population. As of today, we know of sort of around 25,000, something like that. When we first spot an object, we really know very little about it. We just see something moving across the sky. So all you get is just sort of a handful of snapshots, just enough to be able to tell that this isn't an asteroid that we've already seen before. And then once we can calculate the distance to it, we can now start to make predictions about its true size. Is it large or is it small? So we have a lot of information that we have to get pretty quickly to really understand what's going on.
Finding asteroids is just one piece of the puzzle. Planetary scientists are extremely skilled in determining the orbits and speeds of asteroids based on relatively small amounts of data. NASA runs simulations of the trajectories asteroids could take, which is useful but time-consuming. A team of scientists in the Netherlands have found a way that could buy us more time.
Our method is very quick. So you can very quickly get an assessment of whether or not the object is dangerous or not. If you look at the classical way of determining the danger of an asteroid, it may take days of computing time on very big machines to determine this hazardousness.
The current problem is that there's just too many asteroids out there to spend a huge amount of computational power on all of them. So the neural network allows us to focus on what really could go and pose a hazard to Earth.
A neural network is a computing system that mimics the way the human brain operates to find underlying relationships in a set of data.
By training the network in this way, you train it in recognizing those objects that are most likely to hit the planet. And once it's trained, you can apply this network to all the unknown asteroids. And then you can make a selection and saying, hey, these are the ones which appear to be having orbits similar to the ones which we know are hitting the planet. That doesn't mean that they do, but it only means that they look very similar to the ones we know they do.
What else did you find? Should we be particularly concerned about anything?
One thing that we did find is that our neural network was able to go and identify a handful of asteroids which weren't considered potentially hazardous, that when we went and integrated them forward in time, they came quite close to Earth.
We find a handful which were not detected before or not considered being dangerous before, and we think they are potentially dangerous.
It's very hard to simulate kind of going forward in time an asteroid that's going to hit Earth because, well, the Earth is really small and well, space is really big, and then you have to have very exact parameters to shoot an asteroid that goes and hits exactly Earth. And then Simon had the ingenious idea of not even trying to do that and just launching the asteroids from Earth's surface and integrating backwards in time.
It's very hard to make it hit. So you need a lot of calculations which all end up in nothing. And the idea was then like, well, let's not do that. This is basically what NASA is doing. NASA is taking an asteroid, making multiple copies of them, shooting them all forwards in time, calculating their orbits, and then see what fraction sort of gets close to Earth. Not even hitting Earth, but getting close to Earth. And that they call it a potential impactor. So you calculate the solar system forwards in time for, let's say, 1,000 years. And then you launch asteroids from the surface as if they, if you go forwards in time, would fall on the surface. You calculate them backwards to today. And then you get your orbital parameters of today's asteroids, which you know will land on the planet. And those you can use as known impactors and compare with all the other asteroids in the solar system.
Can simulations and AI, can those things fill in the gaps where perhaps telescopes and other imaging tools can't?
Absolutely. Since the observations get more complex, the physics gets more complex. And if the physics get more complex, the mathematics becomes more complex. And at some point, you can't solve your problems analytically anymore. And then this is where the computer comes in. Now we have this trained neural network. We have a way of calculating in a fraction of a second whether or not an asteroid is potentially dangerous or not, and therefore deserves more attention or more time to spend on for really finding out if it is dangerous.
When it comes to hunting asteroids, time is critical.
What we can do about a potentially hazardous object depends a great deal on what we know about it and how much time we have before the encounter. We'd really like to find them when they're decades away, because the more time you have, the more options you have, and the less energy it takes to move an object aside.
It also means we might not have to resort to launching a nuclear warhead at an asteroid. Until recently, pretty much our only choice.
That's an option of last resort, in my opinion, yes. We have lots of options available. You can just simply bump into the object and just nudge it out of the way. That's one possibility, and that's kind of, in a way, sort of the simplest thing to think about, just nudging it off its path a little bit with, a massive object, a spacecraft, let's say. It's kind of like bowling, if you will. If you have a long time or a long stretch of runway in the lane, just a very small twist on the bowling ball will make a big change in where it ultimately ends up. Another option would be something where you take a very big, massive spacecraft and you park it next to the object and you use the force of gravity as a towing rig. That takes longer, though, and you need to be able to send a pretty massive spacecraft, and it obviously depends a lot on how big the asteroid is. Other options start to get more and more complicated, and they range from painting one side of the object a white color and painting the other side dark and then letting the pressure of light sort of perturb its orbit.
In a departure from the lab and computer simulations, NASA has real plans to rehearse kinetic impact deflection. In 2021, the agency will launch DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test mission, which will intercept a 160-meter asteroid in 2022. Better to practice now before we have to deal with an actual threat. In the meantime, discovering asteroids is our best bet. Thousands of scientists and amateur astronomers around the world make up an informal network that survey the heavens. But that may not be enough. NASA wants more resources to map our solar system and better technology.
We need to ramp up our network of sensors, and also we need to just continue to strengthen our network of international observers so that we can get follow-up, because we find these objects when they're distributed all over the night sky.
Once we get more observations, we get better data, we can make better predictions.
If you look at the big impactors we have had in the last, let's say, 20 years, or maybe 30 years, or 50 years, most of them we haven't seen coming. So the danger, the real danger, I think, comes from the objects we don't know about, and not from the objects we do know about.
This particular natural disaster, like a lot of natural disasters and like climate change, is a problem of the global commons. So the thing that we risk collectively is that it sort of then becomes nobody's problem, and nobody takes ownership over it. Asteroids are all over the sky. They just truly cross boundaries and borders with a second's notice.
I kind of imagine in the future, maybe lots of small satellites around the Earth that are always going and looking outward. I mean, I think it's something worth investing in. It's our existence at stake, right?
The pandemic has affected everyone in different ways. Some pass the time by baking.
Homemade sourdough bread. Do I need to say more?
Some chose to binge watch Netflix.
It's your game.
Or maybe you started a garden oasis in your backyard.
Next, I'm going to put my lettuces in.
But for millions of others,
I'm going to be posting stocks that will boom.
They wanted to uproot the financial industry.
Let's just lock it on up and take $15,000!
Here's a stock that can change your life.
I see a stock going up and I buy it, and I just watch it until it stops going up, and then I sell it.
I have gained over $3 million.
I want some free money.
I don't think you can overstate the online communities or social media's influence on financial markets.
A large group of inexperienced investors who discuss their plans on social media platform Reddit have shaken up the stock market in a big way.
The stock that everybody's talking about right now is GameStop.
Video game retailer GameStop is set to continue their head-spinning ascent today.
The revolutionaries on Reddit are spanking Wall Street's ass.
The more these stocks go up, the more the big guys are getting creamed and losing billions of dollars.
This isn't a wealthy person's game anymore. Anyone can play it.
I took up a little bit of a new hobby, and I am interested in day trading.
As an investor nowadays, you don't have to look a specific way. You don't have to wear specific clothes. You don't have to be doing it from a trading floor on Wall Street in like a high-rise building in downtown Manhattan.
The narrative of what's driving the markets is no longer being held in secret offices in New York and Boston of privileged people talking to other privileged people. It's right out in the open. It's on Twitter, it's on Reddit.
From brokerage apps to Discord channels and subreddits to TikTok finfluencers, one of the last holdouts in the world of disruption, finance is next in line.
Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online.
That's Vlad Tenev, the CEO of Robinhood, the online brokerage app, talking about how he wants his app to disrupt the world of stock trading like Amazon disrupted the world of home shopping.
And I think that speaks to exactly the mission that a platform like Robinhood has, which is to democratize investing.
Robinhood was started in 2013 by Vlad Tenev and Baiju Bhatt in, where else, Silicon Valley, as an alternative to the big brokerages, but with one big difference.
As they were building the social network around finances for people, they realized that there was a gap in the market and that free trading could become something that they could bring to the markets, they could disrupt the industry.
While no-fee trading is industry standard today, it was unheard of when it was first introduced.
The online brokerage industry was really innovative when they came on the scene 10, 15 years ago, but they kind of stopped innovating where you haven't seen those commissions come down beyond $5 or $6 or $7. Robinhood think that by offering zero commission that they're going to push people onto this platform.
And on top of no-fee trading, the customers Robinhood was courting have been long overlooked in the world of finance.
So the typical customer of a Charles Schwab, for example, is putting a lot more money in that brokerage account than the typical customer at Robinhood. Even today, with all of its popularity, the median account size is about $240.
The Fidelities and the Schwabs and the E-Trades of the world, they look down their nose at those kind of accounts. I don't want a $1,000 account. They're just a headache. I want a $100,000 account.
And this is key here, right? Because the thing about Robinhood that's different than every other single brokerage platform is how easy it is to use.
The design of the Robinhood app really has in mind a user who might be coming at this absolutely cold.
The fonts are very well sized, the shapes, the colors, all of that is something that the founders of Robinhood paid really close attention to.
And by creating an interface that catered to a newer investor, they were able to gather a pretty healthy group of customers. And by 2019, they had about 10 million customers.
Those 10 million customers were a huge success story for Robinhood, but no one could have predicted its explosion after the arrival of COVID-19.
Remain indoors to the greatest extent, and 100% of the non-essential workforce must stay home.
What we saw when the pandemic hit was the growth of Robinhood users absolutely turbocharged. And oddly, you saw this surge in interest in stock trading. Then they saw the absolute surge in 2020 in customer growth. And now, by many accounts, they have more than 20 million customers, which is pretty extraordinary. So the next step for them is to figure out how to monetize those users and how, even with their small account sizes, to get them to grow with the company and, as it releases more products, come along with them.
Robinhood would become one of the COVID economy's breakout successes. Robinhood traders, as they're called, became the shorthand explanation for the frenzy of often speculative retail investing after the pandemic lockdowns.
Kids wake up in the morning, they go on Robinhood. They're, in the shower, they check Robinhood. Kids are learning how the stock market works at 18 while they're at school, checking their phones in between classes because notifications pop up telling them what their stocks are doing that day.
With these new tools, millennials and Gen Z are investing in the market in ways their parents could have never even dreamt of.
That is sort of key when we talk about the divide between older and younger generations, is that The younger generation was exposed to so much more information and tools at their disposal to do what they want in the market.
The older generations, you never had the technology or the cost structure that you could play the markets like you can today. So you were stuck with giving your money to a professional investor and paying them a fee to do it.
When I speak to young kids, they tell me, I'm making mistakes, I'm losing money. I'm not a perfect investor, but I'm 18, and by the time I'm 30, which will be, 10 years from now, I'm gonna have interacted with the markets for a decade. And so it's a learning experience more so than anything else.
And you can look at it and you can say, wow, that's risk-taking, that's dumb, but if you could possibly shave 10, 20 years off your working life versus adding 5 years, I don't think you can fault people for that.
But Robinhood is only part of the puzzle. Sure, you can trade on it, but without research, information, and data, you're just blindly throwing darts at different stocks and hoping to strike it rich.
Wall Street forever